My mother-in-law shoved me down her staircase in front of nearly 50 guests because I refused to name my unborn daughter after her. I was on the upper landing of Lorraine Mercer's house when she blocked my way. Downstairs, her anniversary party was still going. Music, glasses, and the smell of glazed ham she had insisted on cooking so everyone would praise her. I had gone upstairs only because the downstairs bathroom had a line, and at 7 months pregnant, my bladder had stopped negotiating. That was why I was alone. That was why she had been waiting. "So," Lorraine said as I stepped out, "have you finally decided what you're naming my granddaughter?" She smiled while she asked it. Lorraine always smiled when she was about to take something from you. My husband, Caleb, and I had chosen the name months earlier. We were lying in bed, his hand over mine on my stomach, when we said it aloud. Clara. It was my grandmother's name, the woman who raised me, taught me to drive, bake bread without measuring, and leave an argument before anger made the decision for me. She had died the year before I became pregnant. Naming my daughter after her felt like keeping a promise. "We're naming her Clara," I said. Lorraine's expression froze for 1 second too long. Then her smile disappeared. "Clara," she repeated. "Not Elaine." Elaine was her legal first name. She had used Lorraine since college, but for months she had slipped Elaine into conversations as though repetition could turn her demand into tradition. "I raised Caleb alone," she said. "I sacrificed everything for him, and you can't give me this one thing? It isn't about you. Clara was my grandmother. Some dead woman I never met matters more than the woman who gave you your husband?" Her voice sharpened. Below us, the party quieted. Several guests looked toward the staircase. "You've tried to push me out of Caleb's life since the day you met him," she said. "Admit it." I stepped backward. There was nowhere behind me except 17 wooden steps. "Prove I'm wrong," she whispered. "Change the name." "I'm not changing it." Something in her face emptied. No anger, no tears, only a deliberate calm. "Wrong answer," she said. Her palm struck the center of my chest. It was not an accident. She extended her arm and drove her weight through it. I fell backward. My arms closed around my stomach before I understood what was happening. Not the baby. That was the only thought in my head. Not the baby. My hip hit one step, my shoulder hit another, then everything became flashes of wood, ceiling, pain, voices, and the feeling of having no control over my body. I reached the bottom. The floor knocked the breath out of me. For a moment, I could not move. Guests crowded around the railings, staring down. Lorraine remained at the top. Her arm was still extended. Before she screamed or ran toward me, I saw something on her face that I would remember forever. Satisfaction. The look of someone who had completed a task. Then Lorraine screamed. "Oh my God, she slipped!" Her voice broke perfectly on the last word. She rushed down the stairs with both hands stretched out toward me, her face rearranged into horror before anyone could look closely enough to remember what it had been a second earlier. "I tried to catch her," she cried. "I reached for her, but she fell." By the time she reached the bottom, tears were already running down her cheeks. And people believed tears. Caleb pushed through the crowd and dropped beside me. His hands hovered over my shoulders and stomach, terrified to touch the wrong place. "She pushed me," I said. My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone lying across the room. "Caleb, your mother pushed me." Lorraine recoiled. "How can you say that?" she whispered. Then she looked around at the guests. "I would never hurt my grandchild. Never!" Almost 50 people had been standing in that house. Some had seen Lorraine cornering me. Others had heard her voice rising. Several had looked directly toward the landing moments before I fell. Not one person spoke. That silence frightened me more than the stares. It told me that I was not fighting only Lorraine. I was fighting the version of Lorraine that lived inside everyone else's mind. The generous widow, the devoted mother, the elegant woman who remembered birthdays and sent handwritten cards. To understand why they believed her so easily, I have to go back. My name is Hannah Reed. I was 32 when this happened. I met Caleb Mercer 5 years earlier at a co-worker's wedding reception in Milwaukee. The ballroom was too loud, and we spent most of the night leaning close just to hear each other. By midnight, I knew I wanted to see him again. Caleb was calm and thoughtful. He listened without waiting for his turn to speak. His father had disappeared when he was 4, and Lorraine had raised him alone. At least, that was the story. Caleb carried gratitude toward her like a permanent debt. Every decision had to be measured against what she had sacrificed for him. At first, I admired it. His loyalty seemed tender. I did not understand that loyalty built on guilt is another kind of chain. Lorraine lived in a large brick house in Brookfield, one of those places with spotless windows, trimmed hedges, and rooms arranged to look untouched. She was 61, with silver blonde hair cut sharply at her jaw. She wore pale sweaters, gold jewelry, and perfume that remained in a room after she left. On our first meeting, she was charming. She remembered that I took tea without sugar. She asked about my job, my sister, and the grandmother who had raised me. The next morning, she mailed me a thank you card for bringing flowers. That was Lorraine's gift. She made people feel noticed. Years later, I realized she did it because attention created loyalty. If she remembered every detail about you, then when someone accused her of cruelty, you remembered the kindness first. Her charm did not hide the weapon. Her charm was the weapon. The first time I saw what lived underneath it was 8 months into my relationship with Caleb. We were having dinner at her house when Caleb casually mentioned that we might visit Vancouver in the autumn. Lorraine set down her fork. She did not raise her voice. She did not become openly angry. Instead, she quietly reminded him that he had promised to take her to visit family in Montana that same month. There had been no promise. I knew because Caleb and I had discussed every trip we were considering. But Lorraine kept talking. She said she understood that plans changed. She said she would never want to interfere. She said she only wished he had told her before she became excited. Within 15 minutes, Caleb was apologizing. By dessert, the trip to Vancouver had become my selfish attempt to keep him away from his mother. On the drive home, I said, "You never promised her Montana." Caleb stared through the windshield. "Maybe I did and forgot. She invented the whole thing." He shook his head. "My mother wouldn't just make something like that up." I heard that sentence dozens of times over the next 5 years. Eventually, it stopped sounding like an explanation. It sounded like a prayer. Caleb and I married 2 years later in a small ceremony near Lake Michigan. Lorraine cried through the vows, and everyone called it beautiful. 3 days before the wedding, however, she phoned me to say my dress looked a little too youthful in the photos I had shown her. She offered to help me find something more appropriate for a woman joining the Mercer family. When I politely refused, she told Caleb that I had rejected her attempt to be included. That was how she worked. Nothing was ever large enough to sound dangerous when described alone. A comment about a dress, a disappointed expression at dinner, a phone call made while I was not in the room. Each incident was small and easy to deny, but together, they left marks. When Caleb and I bought our townhouse in Wauwatosa, Lorraine gave us $42,000 toward the down payment. It was generous. I will never pretend otherwise, but it was never truly a gift. She mentioned it when we chose furniture she disliked. She mentioned it when we spent Christmas morning with my sister instead of her. She mentioned it whenever Caleb disagreed with her. After everything I did to help you buy that house, she would say lightly, and Caleb would immediately become quieter. Eventually, I understood that the money had not bought us a home. It had bought Lorraine a permanent seat inside it. I should explain who Clara was, because Lorraine never once asked. My parents separated when I was 5. My mother worked long shifts at a nursing home, and my father moved across the country. Clara raised me in a narrow yellow house in Racine with a vegetable garden behind the garage and wind chimes that never stopped moving. She was 68 when I came to live with her and 87 when she died. Between those years, she taught me almost everything useful I knew. She taught me how to drive in an empty supermarket parking lot before sunrise. She taught me how to make chicken soup without a recipe and how to repair a loose button properly instead of simply pushing the needle through twice and hoping. Most importantly, she taught me one rule. Leave the room before you say something you cannot take back. Clara could be angry, but she was never cruel. She never used love as leverage. She died 8 months before I became pregnant, in the same yellow house where she had raised me. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, while the hospice nurse listened for a heartbeat that was no longer there. Naming my daughter Clara was not a casual preference. It was the closest thing to bringing something precious forward with me. When Lorraine called her some dead woman, I finally understood that she genuinely believed no one should matter more than she did. Caleb's cousin, Maya, tried to warn me years earlier. We were washing dishes after a family dinner when she leaned closer and said, without looking up, "Be careful around Lorraine." I asked what she meant. Maya dried a plate slowly. "She decides what happened first," she said. "Then she convinces everyone else." I laughed nervously and asked whether they had argued. Maya's face changed. When I was 17, she accused me of stealing from my aunt. I didn't. But by the time she said it openly, she had already spent weeks telling people she was worried about me. What happened? My own mother believed her. Maya placed the plate in the cupboard. That's what Lorraine does. She doesn't just tell a lie, she prepares people to accept it. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I dismissed it as old family resentment. The pregnancy was what finally exposed everything. Lorraine had always controlled Caleb through guilt, money, and carefully shaped stories. But a baby was different. A baby was someone she wanted to claim before that child had even taken her first breath. The name became her first test. At our 20-week ultrasound, we learned we were having a girl. That evening, Caleb called Lorraine. Before she congratulated us, she said, "Wonderful, then we can finally use Elaine." 2 weeks later, Caleb and I chose Clara, and I made the mistake of believing the decision belonged only to us. The first public move came at the baby shower Caleb's Aunt Denise hosted. Halfway through the afternoon, Lorraine stood with a glass of champagne and announced that the Mercer family had a beautiful tradition of naming the first daughter Elaine. "I just know Hannah will honor it," she said, smiling directly at me. Nearly 30 women turned toward my chair. Some smiled, others nodded approvingly. There was no family tradition. Lorraine was an only child. No firstborn daughter before her had carried that name. She had invented a legacy in front of a room full of witnesses and placed me in a position where correcting her would make me appear rude at my own shower. So I smiled. Afterward, I told Caleb she had lied. "She probably meant it symbolically," he said. Symbolically became another word for something Lorraine could do without consequences. Then the private phone calls began. Lorraine contacted Caleb whenever she knew I was at work. I would come home and find him unusually quiet. Eventually, he would mention that his mother was worried that pregnancy was affecting my judgment, worried that I seemed emotional, worried that I was separating him from his family because we had missed 2 Sunday dinners. She never accused me directly. She placed small concerns in his mind and allowed them to grow on their own. The next move involved money. Lorraine called one afternoon and said she wanted to create a college fund for the baby. "That's very generous," I told her. "I'll manage the account, of course," she replied. "And since I'll be funding it, I should have some influence over the important decisions." I said Caleb and I would discuss it. Her voice remained sweet. "I simply want to make sure this child has someone stable protecting her future." Someone stable. She paused afterwards so I could hear exactly what she meant. About 5 weeks before the party, I saw something I did not understand until much later. We were at Lorraine's house for Sunday lunch. I took a wrong turn while looking for the bathroom and stepped into her study. On the desk was a cream business card with gold lettering. Harper, Sloan, and Reeves. Family law. It was not buried beneath papers. It stood upright against the lamp as though Lorraine wanted it within sight. Beside it hung an old photograph. A much younger Lorraine held a toddler I recognized as Caleb. A man stood next to them, but his face had been scratched out with blue ink so violently that the paper was torn. His body remained. Where his face should have been, there was only a hole. I was still staring when Lorraine appeared behind me. "Are you lost, Hannah?" Her voice was warm, but she was standing much too close. I apologized and said I was looking for the bathroom. She pointed down the hall and smiled. For several weeks, I pushed the photograph and the lawyer's card out of my mind. Then Lorraine made her most effective move yet. I came home from work one evening and found Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, refusing to meet my eyes. After nearly an hour, he finally told me what was wrong. Lorraine claimed I had said to her, "You'll die alone and you deserve it." I had never said anything remotely like that, but she had cried while repeating it to Caleb. She had allowed her voice to break at the perfect moment, and by the time I arrived home, he was already carrying her story as though it were a memory. "I didn't say that," I told him. "Why would she invent something so cruel?" There it was again, the sentence that protected Lorraine from every consequence. I realized that anything I shared with my husband could travel through him and return as a weapon. So I stopped confiding in him. I stopped telling him when Lorraine called. I stopped explaining why I was frightened. I became quiet inside my own marriage. From the outside, that quiet made me look withdrawn and unstable. That was exactly what Lorraine needed. She isolated me, then pointed to my isolation as evidence that something was wrong. I did not know it yet, but she had done the same thing to Caleb's father. She had erased him from his own family and then used the empty space as proof that he had chosen to disappear. The next move was the staircase. At the hospital that night, the doctors monitored me for hours. The baby's heartbeat remained strong. There was no bleeding, no early labor, and no sign that the fall had harmed her. I had bruises across my hip, shoulder, and back, but my body had protected the one thing that mattered. When the doctor said our daughter was safe, Caleb cried. He pressed my hand to his face and thanked God, and for a few minutes, I believed the truth had finally broken through. He had seen me at the bottom of the stairs. He had heard what I said. Surely this time he would believe me. Then the doctor left, and the room became quiet. Caleb sat beside the bed. "What really happened?" he asked. I stared at him. "I already told you." "I know, I just mean, are you certain?" She put her hand against my chest and pushed. He looked down at our joined hands. "You were tired. Your balance has been different lately. Maybe you stepped back," and I saw her face. "Hannah." She looked pleased. He squeezed my fingers gently, the way someone comforts a person they have decided is confused. My mother would never hurt the baby. Not me, the baby, as though hurting me would have been imaginable, but endangering her granddaughter was the line Lorraine could never cross. I turned my face toward the wall. I was too exhausted to argue. By morning, Lorraine's version had spread through the entire family. My phone was filled with messages. Denise wrote, "We're all worried about you. Please don't be ashamed to ask for help." A cousin I had met twice said she was praying for my mental health. Another relative wrote that pregnancy could cause frightening emotional changes and that no one would judge me. Every message treated the fall as evidence that something was wrong with me. No one asked why Lorraine had cornered me upstairs. No one asked why several guests had heard us arguing. No one asked why her arm had still been extended when I hit the floor. Around noon, Denise called. Her voice was painfully gentle. She said Lorraine had been worried for months because I had seemed unlike myself. According to her, I had experienced episodes of confusion, anger, and paranoia throughout the pregnancy. None of it was true, but Lorraine had prepared them before the fall. The staircase had not created the story. It had completed it. She transformed 17 steps into a mental health crisis and cast herself as the frightened mother-in-law who had tried to prevent it. I called my older sister, Olivia. She was 4 years older than me and had never softened an unpleasant truth simply to make it easier to hear. When I finished telling her what happened, she did not comfort me first. "Save everything," she said. "What?" "Every message, every voicemail. Take screenshots. Write down dates and times. Back it up somewhere Lorraine and Caleb cannot access." "Why Caleb?" "Because right now he still believes her." The words hurt because they were true. Olivia continued, "This is going to get worse before it gets better. Whatever you think Lorraine is capable of, assume she is capable of more. Don't waste your energy begging people to believe you. Build proof." I did not understand what kind of proof I would need, but I listened. I created a folder on a private cloud account and began saving everything. That evening, I called Maya. She was the only person in Caleb's family who had not sent me a message disguised as concern. When she answered, she skipped every greeting. "I've been waiting for you to call. Did you see her push me?" Maya was silent for several seconds. "No," she said finally. "I won't lie to you. I was looking toward the dining room when it happened." My stomach dropped. "But I saw her face right before you fell," Maya continued. Her voice changed, so I looked up. She wasn't shocked, she wasn't afraid. What did she look like? Calm. Maya's breathing became uneven. Calm and satisfied. "Then you fell and suddenly she was screaming. I've seen that expression before." "When you were 17? Yes." She told me the full story this time. $40 had disappeared from her aunt's purse during a family gathering. Lorraine never accused Maya directly at first. She simply began expressing concern about her behavior. She mentioned that Maya had become secretive, that she seemed angry, that perhaps she had fallen in with the wrong people. For 2 weeks, Lorraine planted the idea. By the time she finally said she believed Maya had stolen the money, the family was already prepared to accept it. "I never took anything," Maya said, "but my mother watched me differently for almost a year." Then she added quietly, "Lorraine doesn't just lie about you. She installs a different version of you in everyone's mind." I asked Maya the question that had been following me since I saw the damaged photograph. What really happened to Caleb's father? The line went silent. "I don't know everything," she said carefully. "I was young, but I know Lorraine's version isn't true." "What version?" "That he abandoned Caleb and never tried to contact him again." Maya lowered her voice. "I remember my mother arguing with my grandmother about it when they thought I was asleep. Grandma said Lorraine drove him away. Then she said something I never forgot." "What?" "She said Lorraine used Caleb to do it." A cold pressure settled behind my ribs. "Do you know where he is?" "No, but Aunt Evelyn might. She knew Lorraine before any of us were born." After we ended the call, I sat alone in the unfinished nursery. The crib stood against the pale blue wall. Tiny clothes were folded inside a basket. Everything in that room was built for a future Lorraine was already trying to control. I thought about the scratched-out face, the family law card, the stories she had planted about me. For the first time, the staircase did not feel like a moment of rage. It felt like part of something planned. 2 days later, Lorraine called me. I nearly ignored it, but Olivia's warning echoed in my mind. "Save everything." I activated the recording app before answering. Lorraine did not say hello. "I know you've been talking to Maya." I asked her what she saw. "You are calling my relatives and turning them against me." I'm trying to tell people the truth. Lorraine laughed. It was a short, empty sound. None of her usual warmth remained. The truth, she repeated. You still don't understand how any of this works, do you? My hand tightened around the phone. What is that supposed to mean? It means I know what people look for when they decide a mother is unstable. She spoke slowly, almost conversationally. I know what doctors document, I know what social workers notice, I know which words matter in a courtroom, and what makes a judge decide that a woman should not be left alone with a child. My whole body went still. Are you threatening to take my baby? I'm warning you. About what? About continuing this little campaign against me. Her voice softened. That softness frightened me more than shouting would have. I have spent years learning how these systems work, Hannah. You have no idea how easy it is for concern to become an investigation. I could hear my heartbeat through the phone. You pushed me down the stairs. You fell. You put your hand on my chest. No one saw that. The words came immediately. Not denial. Calculation. Lorraine continued. Name the baby whatever you want. I don't care about the name anymore. You almost killed us because of that name. This is about respect now. It is about who will make decisions in this family. This is my child, and Caleb is my son. She paused. If you continue poisoning him against me, I promise you will never spend one unsupervised minute with that baby. My throat closed. I will make sure everyone understands exactly what kind of mother you are. You don't know what kind of mother I am. I know what kind of mother I can prove you are. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Lorraine's cheerful voice returned so suddenly that it made my skin crawl. Now, can we please stop all this ugliness and behave like a family? She disconnected before I answered. I remained sitting on the nursery floor with the recording still running. That call changed everything. Lorraine had not lost control on the staircase. She had tested whether I could be frightened into obedience. When I refused, she moved to the next stage. For almost 2 weeks, she said nothing. No calls, no messages, no visits. The silence should have felt like relief. Instead, it terrified me because I finally understood what Lorraine did during quiet periods. She prepared the ground. At my 34-week appointment, my obstetrician, Dr. Monica Patel, closed the examination room door and sat across from me. Hannah, I need to tell you something unusual. Her expression was serious, but kind. This office has received 2 anonymous calls asking about your mental health. The room seemed to tilt. What did they ask? Whether you have shown signs of paranoia, aggression, or emotional instability. They also asked whether we have concerns about the baby's safety after birth. I felt tears gathering before I could stop them. Dr. Patel leaned forward. I documented both calls, including the time, the questions, and my assessment. What assessment? That you are healthy, mentally stable, and handling a highly stressful situation with remarkable composure. For the first time since the staircase, someone outside my family looked directly at me and said they believed me, and more importantly, she had written it down. The situation escalated again 3 days later. Olivia called me from work, furious. A friend of mine heard Lorraine speaking to one of Caleb's older relatives, she said. Her name is Evelyn Mercer. She's 82. What did Lorraine say? She asked Evelyn to be ready to testify that you've been unstable during the pregnancy. I sat down slowly. Testify where? That's the problem. Lorraine didn't explain. She only said, if something happens with the baby, the family may need people who are willing to tell the truth. The truth. Lorraine was recruiting witnesses for a case no one had told me existed. She was preparing a courtroom before I had even given birth. That evening, Caleb learned about the calls to Dr. Patel. I had not told him. Keeping it from him was terrible for our marriage, but every time I gave him information, Lorraine somehow received a distorted version of it. This time, Aunt Denise called him first. According to her, I had accused Lorraine of interfering with my medical care and was making everything more dramatic. Caleb came home pale. Did my mother really call your doctor? I believe she did. Do you know for certain? I took out my phone. I know she threatened to use doctors, social workers, and courts against me. Then I played him the recording. He listened without interrupting. Lorraine's voice filled our bedroom. I know what people look for when they decide a mother is unstable. I know which words matter in court. I can prove what kind of mother you are. When the recording ended, Caleb remained completely still. For the first time, there was no immediate excuse. No suggestion that I had misunderstood. No sentence about Lorraine meaning well. He picked up his phone and called her. I sat on the edge of the bed while he placed the call on speaker. Mom, he said when she answered, have you been contacting Hannah's doctor? A long silence followed. I could almost picture Lorraine deciding which version of herself would be most effective. Then her voice became warm and wounded. Caleb, sweetheart, I'm only worried about the baby. That isn't what I asked. You told me yourself that Hannah has been unstable. Caleb's eyes lifted toward mine. Lorraine continued. You said you were afraid to leave her alone. You said she had been acting irrationally and that you didn't know what she might do. Caleb's face drained color. I never said that. Of course you did. No, I didn't. You were upset. Maybe you don't remember the exact words. I never told you I was afraid of my wife. Lorraine sighed as though he were being difficult. You've been confiding in me for months, Caleb. I've only tried to protect you. He ended the call without saying goodbye. For several seconds, he stared at the dark phone screen. Then he sat beside me. I never said those things. I know. She repeated them like they came from me. Yes. His hands began to shake. She made it sound like I had already decided you were dangerous. That's what she's been doing. Caleb looked toward the nursery across the hall. How long? At least since I became pregnant. He closed his eyes. No, I mean, how long has she done this to people? I thought about Maya, the scratched photograph, The father Lorraine claimed had vanished, probably most of her life. 2 days later, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. There was no stamp or postal mark. Someone had delivered it by hand. My name was written across the front in Lorraine's familiar, slanted blue handwriting. Inside was one sheet of cream stationery. All you had to do was honor me. That was all. Now enjoy these final weeks with your daughter. There was no signature. She did not need one. The words were frightening, but the delivery frightened me more. Lorraine had driven across the city, entered our building, and placed the letter inside our mailbox herself. It was a message beneath the message. No distance is enough. I can reach your home whenever I choose. I photographed the letter and placed it in the digital folder Olivia had told me to create. While holding it beneath the kitchen light, I noticed the blue ink. The same shade, the same sharp slant. I had seen it before. Beneath the man whose face had been scratched out of the photograph in Lorraine's study, someone had written a date. October 1995. The month Caleb's father supposedly disappeared from his life. Before I could decide what to do with that realization, the phone rang. It was Evelyn Mercer, the elderly relative Lorraine had tried to recruit against me. "Hannah," she said, her voice rough but steady, "I expect you know Lorraine has been asking me to lie for her." I heard. "Well, I told her to go to hell." Despite everything, I almost laughed. Evelyn continued, "But that is not why I'm calling. I'm calling because this is not the first time Lorraine has tried to take a child away from one of its parents." My grip tightened around the phone. Then Evelyn asked the question that changed everything. "Do you know how to contact Caleb's father?"
According to Lorraine, Caleb's father had abandoned him when he was 4 and had never looked back. "No one has heard from him in almost 30 years, I said. "That is a lie Lorraine has been telling for almost 30 years, Evelyn replied. Her certainty made me sit completely still. "His name is Marcus Bell. He did not abandon Caleb. Lorraine forced him out and spent decades making sure he could never return." "Where is he?" "He lives in Madison." Madison was barely 90 minutes away. For all those years, Caleb had believed his father had vanished from the world. In reality, he had been living less than 2 hours from us. "I have his telephone number," Evelyn said. "I've had it for years." "Why didn't anyone tell Caleb?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Because we were cowards. Lorraine made it easier to stay silent than to challenge her. I told myself it was not my place, and I have regretted that excuse every day." She paused. "But now she has asked me to help take another child away from her mother. I am too old to carry this secret any longer." I called Marcus the next morning. My hands shook so badly that I entered one digit incorrectly and had to start again. A man answered on the 4th ring. "Hello? My name is Hannah Mercer," I said. "I'm Caleb's wife." There was no response. "I got your number from Evelyn." The silence lasted so long that I thought the call had disconnected. Then Marcus made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "Caleb has a wife?" "Yes." "He got married?" "Yes." I placed a hand over my stomach. "And we're expecting a daughter." His breathing changed. "A granddaughter?" he whispered. "I have a granddaughter coming?" Each word sounded fragile. Marcus was 65 and worked part-time repairing antique furniture. He had lived in Madison for more than 20 years. He told me that he had married Lorraine when they were both young. At first she had been loving, energetic, and intensely devoted. After Caleb was born, that devotion became control. "She needed every decision to prove that she mattered most," he said. "Where we lived, who we visited, how I spent money. If I disagreed, she didn't argue with me. She told other people she was worried about me." The pattern was painfully familiar. Lorraine told friends that Marcus had become unpredictable. She told relatives he was angry and emotionally unstable. When he defended himself, she claimed his defensiveness proved her concerns. "She could turn you into a monster," Marcus said, "and then punish you for refusing to admit you were one." When he eventually asked for a divorce, Lorraine accused him of threatening her. He denied ever laying a hand on her. But by then, she had already spent months preparing relatives to believe he was dangerous. She hired Harper Sloan and Reeves, the same family law firm whose card I had seen on her desk. Lorraine submitted reports, collected statements, and convinced people to repeat concerns she had planted herself. Marcus was granted supervised visits with Caleb. Then those visits became less frequent. Each time he challenged the restrictions, Lorraine produced a new allegation. She told the court he frightened Caleb. She told teachers he might try to take him from school. She told Caleb that his father had hurt her and wanted to destroy their family. "He was a little boy," Marcus said. "He believed his mother because children are supposed to believe their mothers." By the time Caleb was 10, he refused to see him. Marcus sent birthday cards, graduations, Christmas, almost 30 years of letters he never opened. I closed my eyes. "What do you want from him?" "Nothing," Marcus answered immediately. "I don't expect him to forgive me. I don't expect him to call me dad. I only want him to know that I wrote." He paused. "And if he lets me, I want to give him the box." Marcus's story changed the meaning of everything. The argument over my daughter's name had never truly been about the name. Clara was a test. Lorraine wanted to know whether I would surrender something deeply important simply because she demanded it. If I had agreed, she would have known I could be controlled. When I refused, I became a threat. Not because I hated her, because I was the kind of parent she could not command. I was another Marcus. So Lorraine reopened the same playbook she had used almost 30 years earlier. First came the quiet concerns, then the invented instability, then the relatives prepared to testify, the doctor's office, the lawyer, the official-looking records built from lies. Even the staircase had a purpose. If I had remained silent, Lorraine could have told everyone I fell because I was confused, emotional, or unsafe during pregnancy. My bruises would have become evidence against me. She was not improvising. She was repeating the things she knew how to do best. That evening, I told Caleb about Marcus. I did not begin with the recording or the letters. I simply told him his father was alive, lived in Madison, and had spent decades trying to reach him. Caleb stared at me as though I had begun speaking another language. "No," Evelyn gave me his number. No, Hannah, my father left. That is what Lorraine told you? He disappeared. He sent you letters. Caleb stood and walked away from the table. My mother would not do that to me. I heard desperation in his voice rather than anger. The story of Lorraine's sacrifice supported his entire childhood. If Marcus had not abandoned him, then every memory built on that story became uncertain. She wouldn't keep my own father from me, Caleb said. I wrote Marcus's number on a piece of paper and placed it on the table beside Evelyn's. Don't believe me? I said. Call them. He looked at the numbers. I'm done being the only person whose word you compare against hers. Caleb called Evelyn first. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Then he called Marcus and went into our bedroom, closing the door behind him. He stayed there a long time. When he finally came out, his face looked different, older, emptied of something. He remembered every birthday, Caleb whispered. I did not speak. He told me what he sent each year. Caleb sat heavily at the table. When I was 8, I got a blue bicycle. Mom said she bought it with money from an extra project at work. His eyes filled. Marcus sent it. I reached for his hand. She let me thank her for it. She watched me write it for years and never said anything. His voice broke. How much of my life belongs to a story she invented? There was no answer that could make that question smaller. 2 weeks later, my water broke at 6:30 in the morning while Caleb was making coffee. We reached Lakeshore Medical Center before 8. The first thing Caleb did was speak to the charge nurse. My mother's name is Elaine Lorraine Mercer, he said. She is not allowed on this floor or anywhere near my wife. The nurse studied his face. She assaulted Hannah during pregnancy. We have recordings, letters, and medical documentation. If she arrives or calls, please contact security. The nurse glanced at me, then entered the information into the chart. She will not get past the desk, she promised. For 6 hours, everything remained quiet. Then I heard Lorraine shouting in the hallway. Even through the contractions, I recognized her voice instantly. Caleb left the room before I could reach for him. You need to leave, he said outside. I am your mother. That is my granddaughter being born. You lost the right to be here. That woman cannot keep me away from my family. You pushed my pregnant wife down a staircase. I did no such thing. She fell, and now she has poisoned you against me. The corridor went quiet. Then Caleb said 4 words that destroyed Lorraine's performance. I talked to Marcus. The silence afterward felt enormous. I know about the cards, Caleb continued. I know about the bicycle. I know he lived 90 minutes away while you told me he disappeared. Lorraine's voice changed. The grief vanished. What remained was low and cold. Everything I did was for you. You stole my father from me. He would have made you weak. Hannah is making you weak now. Caleb's answer struck through the hallway like a slammed door. Stop talking about my wife. You don't understand what she is. You don't get Hannah. You don't get my daughter. You are finished. A nurse entered my room looking shaken. Mrs. Mercer, I need to tell you that the woman outside claims you threatened to harm yourself. She is demanding that a hospital social worker evaluate you. I laughed in the middle of a contraction. Of course Lorraine had done that. Even while her entire story collapsed, she reached once more for the same weapon. A few minutes later, a social worker entered carrying a gray folder. And down the hallway, a security escorted Lorraine away. She screamed one final warning. You'll regret this. The paperwork is already filed. The hearing is already scheduled. The door closed. The social worker sat beside my bed and opened her folder. Tell me exactly what she means by that, she said. I told the social worker everything between contractions. I told her about the argument over the name, the staircase, the anonymous calls to Dr. Patel, the recording, the letter delivered by hand, Marcus, the family law firm. She listened without interrupting and wrote steadily in the gray folder. At first, the folder frightened me. Lorraine had taught me to fear official records because she understood how easily they could be twisted. But as I spoke, I realized this record was different. The social worker had already heard Lorraine shouting in the hallway. She had watched security remove her. She had heard the accusation about self-harm arrive at the exact moment Lorraine was denied access to me. When I finished, the woman closed the folder. I have worked in hospitals for 18 years, she said. I know what a genuine safety report sounds like. Another contraction tightened through my body, and I know what a retaliatory report looks like. She placed her hand gently over mine. What I saw outside does not make me concerned about your ability to care for your child. It makes me concerned about the person making these allegations. I began crying, not because I was afraid, because someone had looked at the entire situation and recognized it immediately. You are going to deliver your daughter, she said. I will document everything else. This part does not belong on your shoulders right now. Clara was born at 9:18 that evening, 7 pounds and 3 ounces. Dark hair, furious lungs. She screamed until the nurse placed her on my chest. Then she became completely still. Caleb leaned over us and pressed his forehead against mine. For that one moment, Lorraine did not exist. There was only our daughter. Then, the legal papers arrived. Lorraine had not been bluffing in the hallway. Through Harper, Sloan, and Reeves, she had filed a petition seeking grandparent visitation and a court-ordered parenting assessment. Her claim was that I was mentally unstable and presented a danger to Clara. She had filed the petition days after pushing me down the stairs, before Clara had even been born. Suddenly, every move made sense. The invented concerns, the relatives she had approached as witnesses, the anonymous calls to my doctor, the story about my emotional condition. She had been building evidence before there was even a hearing.
I came to believe that the staircase itself was supposed to become part of her case. If I had accepted her version, if I had said, I slipped, then the fall could be described as another episode. A pregnant woman losing control, a future mother unable to keep herself or her child safe. But Olivia had told me to save everything. So when we met our attorney, I brought a folder Lorraine did not know existed. The recording of her explaining that she knew what courts looked for in an unstable mother. The handwritten threat delivered to our mailbox, Dr. Patel's signed notes documenting the anonymous calls and confirming that I appeared mentally healthy and stable, the hospital social worker's report, Maya's statement about Lorraine's expression at the top of the stairs, Evelyn's statement that Lorraine had asked her to testify against me before Clara was born, and Marcus. Marcus was willing to describe what Lorraine had done almost 30 years earlier. The same rumors, the same accusations of instability, the same law firm, the same effort to separate a child from a parent who stood in her way. Lorraine's attorney apparently advised her to withdraw the petition after reviewing our evidence. She refused.
That was the part of her I had underestimated. Lorraine did not believe she could lose. For decades, people had accepted her version because it was easier than confronting her. She had outlasted Marcus, she had silenced Maya, she had trained Caleb to question his own memory before questioning hers. Why would this time be different? The hearing took place 4 months after Clara's birth. Lorraine entered the courtroom wearing cream, gold, and a worried expression. She looked exactly like the woman everyone trusted. Caleb sat beside me. Across the aisle, Lorraine kept glancing at him as though she expected one look from her to bring him back. When she testified, she was extraordinary. Her voice trembled in the right places. She spoke about loving Clara. She said she had only acted out of concern. She described me as overwhelmed and frightened, a young mother who needed help but was too proud to accept it. For 20 minutes, I felt the old fear return, the fear that charm would once again become truth simply because it was easier to believe. Then our attorney played the recording. Lorraine's cold voice filled the courtroom. "I know what kind of mother I can prove you are." The woman crying on the witness stand and the woman on the recording existed side by side. For the first time, everyone could hear both.
The courtroom changed. It was not dramatic. No one gasped. The judge did not interrupt. But Lorraine's tears stopped. Her face remained still for 1 second too long, the way it always did when something escaped her control. Our attorney replayed the final sentence. "I know what kind of mother you are." Lorraine's own voice sounded patient and certain. The judge looked from the speaker to the woman on the witness stand. Lorraine tried to recover. "I was frightened," she said. "Hannah had been turning my son against me. I said things I did not mean." "But you had already contacted her doctor," our attorney replied. "I was concerned. You had already approached relatives about testifying. I asked my family for support. You had already hired the same law firm you used during your former husband's custody case." Lorraine's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the question. For the first time, Lorraine looked toward Marcus. He sat behind us in a dark jacket, holding both hands together in his lap. She stared at him as though he had returned from the dead, only to betray her. Marcus testified after lunch. He did not raise his voice. He did not describe Lorraine as evil or demand punishment. He simply explained what had happened. He told the judge how concern had become accusation, how accusation had become documentation, and how documentation had slowly removed him from Caleb's life. He described the returned birthday cards, the school report, the supervised visits, the relatives who repeated statements Lorraine had first suggested to them. Then our attorney placed one of the unopened envelopes on the evidence table. It was addressed to Caleb in Marcus's handwriting. The postal date was nearly 26 years old. Lorraine's lawyer asked why Marcus had eventually stopped fighting. "Because I was tired," he answered. "Isn't it possible that you abandoned your responsibilities?" Marcus looked toward Caleb. "I stopped going to court. I never stopped loving my son." The courtroom became completely silent. "I believed that fighting was hurting him," Marcus continued. "That was my mistake. Lorraine understood that if she made every attempt painful enough, eventually I would disappear from the official record." He looked at the judge. "She is doing the same thing to Hannah. The difference is that Hannah started saving the evidence before Lorraine finished building the story." The judge dismissed Lorraine's petition. She described it as a disturbing misuse of a legal process intended to protect children. She refused the request for visitation. She refused the parenting assessment. She also ordered that the allegations and hospital incident be referred for further review. Lorraine sat motionless while the decision was read. She had spent decades believing that if she prepared the first version of events, everyone else would be forced to live inside it. This time, the record had reached the room before her story could fully close around us. As we stood to leave, Lorraine turned toward Caleb. "You are really choosing her over your own mother?" Caleb did not answer immediately. Then he looked at Clara sleeping in the carrier beside me. "I'm choosing my family." Lorraine's expression hardened. "I am your family. You were supposed to be." Those were the last words he spoke to her in person. But Lorraine did not surrender quietly. 2 weeks after losing the case, a formal demand arrived from Harper, Sloan & Reeves. Lorraine claimed that the $42,000 she had contributed to our townhouse was not a gift. According to the letter, it had always been a loan, and she wanted the full amount returned immediately. There was no loan agreement, no repayment schedule, no signed document. At the time, Lorraine had repeatedly called it a gift. Our attorney believed her claim would fail. Caleb read the demand twice. Then he placed it on the kitchen table. "We're paying her. We don't legally have to. I know." He looked around the house, the walls we had painted, the nursery we had prepared, the place where Clara would learn to crawl. "I don't want $1 of hers inside this home." We took out a second loan. It was financially painful. The interest would follow us for years, but we sent Lorraine a check for the entire $42,000. No message, no explanation, only the amount. She had used that money as a leash since the day she gave it to us. Returning it was the moment Caleb finally cut the cord. Lorraine then tried to turn the extended family against us. For most of her life, that strategy had worked, but too many people had seen too much. Evelyn told everyone that Lorraine had asked her to lie. Maya finally repeated what had happened when she was 17. Marcus was no longer a faceless villain from an old family story. He was a real man with 30 years of unopened cards. Aunt Delise called me crying. "I should have asked what happened," she said. "Instead, I believed Lorraine because believing her was easier." Other relatives apologized more cautiously. Some never apologized at all. Lorraine kept a small group around her, people who had invested so much in her version that accepting the truth would force them to question their own silence. But the family mythology had broken. Once people learned that Marcus had not abandoned Caleb, they began reopening every old story Lorraine had told, and many of those stories looked very different when examined in daylight. The legal victory did not erase the grief. That grief belonged mostly to Caleb, and I had to learn not to rush him through it. He understood what Lorraine had done. He understood that she had pushed me, lied about my mental health, tried to separate me from our daughter, and stolen nearly 30 years from him and Marcus. But she was still his mother. That fact did not disappear simply because the truth had arrived. There had been real moments of tenderness in his childhood. Birthday cakes she decorated herself. Fevers she sat through beside his bed. School lunches packed with notes inside. Scraped knees, cleaned and covered with brightly colored bandages. Those memories were not necessarily false. That was one of the hardest things for Caleb to accept. A person can genuinely love you and still destroy anyone who threatens their control over you. Both things can exist at once. Caleb mourned the mother he believed he had. He mourned the childhood he now had to reinterpret. He mourned the blue bicycle, the returned letters, the father he had been taught to hate. Some nights, I found him sitting in Clara's room after she had fallen asleep. He would watch her breathing with an expression I could not read. I knew he was imagining himself at 5 years old, listening to Lorraine explain why his father was dangerous. I would sit beside him without speaking. There was nothing I could say that would return those years. The quietest moment came when Clara was about 4 months old. Caleb was lying on the couch with her, asleep against his chest. He looked down at her and said, almost too softly for me to hear, she would have been a wonderful grandmother. He was not defending Lorraine. He was grieving the version of her that might have existed. The woman who baked cookies without demanding loyalty in return. The grandmother who told stories and held out her arms without deciding first who Clara was allowed to love. That woman had never truly existed, but Caleb still had to mourn her. Sometimes losing an imagined person hurts more than losing the real one, because there are no bad memories to balance the loss. There was only the life that might have been. I sat beside him and placed my hand over Clara's back. I let him grieve. Marcus entered our lives slowly. At first, every conversation between him and Caleb felt careful. They were father and son, but also strangers, separated by almost 3 decades. There were wounds on both sides. Marcus had eventually stopped fighting. Caleb had believed the worst of him. Neither fact could be undone. They could only be understood and, perhaps, forgiven. Marcus began coming for Sunday dinner. The first time he held Clara, his hands shook so badly that Caleb stood close beside him.
She's stronger than she looks, I told him. Marcus smiled through tears. So was her grandmother, apparently. I knew he meant Clara, the woman whose name my daughter carried, not Lorraine. Several weeks later, Marcus brought the box. It was an ordinary brown storage box sealed with old tape. Caleb carried it into his office and closed the door. He remained inside for most of the day. I did not interrupt him. When he finally came out, his eyes were swollen. He held an opened birthday card. This one was for my 9th birthday, he said. He sat at the kitchen table and read it aloud. Happy birthday, buddy. I hope the baseball glove fits. Hit the ball hard and call me anytime, day or night. I love you, Dad. There was nothing dramatic in the message. That was what made it unbearable. It was an ordinary card from a father who missed his son. For 27 years, it had remained unopened in a box in Madison. Caleb lowered his head onto the table and cried. Not the quiet tears he had shed in the hospital. This was the kind of crying that seemed to come from the child he had been. I stood behind him with my hands on his shoulders. There were dozens of letters, birthday cards, Christmas cards, a graduation card Marcus had written after finding Caleb's name in a school program someone sent him. Caleb read every one. It took weeks. With each envelope, another piece of Lorraine's story fell apart. Marcus never demanded forgiveness. He never tried to force an instant father-son relationship. He simply kept showing up. He came for dinner. He called before visiting. He listened when Caleb was angry. He accepted silence when Caleb had no words. Gradually, they began learning each other in the present tense, not as the father and son they should have been, as the 2 men they had become.
The first time Marcus babysat Clara alone, he called me twice. The first call came 10 minutes after Caleb and I left. She made a strange sound, he said. Not crying exactly, more like a cough. She probably discovered her own voice. Should I take her temperature? No, she's fine. The second call came during dinner. She finished the bottle, but she left half an ounce. Is that normal? Completely normal. He became quiet. Then I heard his voice tremble. I'm sorry. I know I'm being ridiculous. You're not. I've just waited a very long time for someone in this family to trust me with a child. I closed my eyes. You're her grandfather, Marcus. You don't have to earn every minute. But I understood why he believed he did. For nearly 30 years, Lorraine had made him feel dangerous for wanting to be near his own son. Now he treated every ordinary privilege as something fragile. When we returned, Clara was asleep in his arms. Marcus was sitting completely still in the rocking chair, afraid that moving might wake her. She likes the song about the moon, he whispered. Caleb stood in the doorway watching them. For a moment, I saw the life Lorraine had stolen, and the small piece of it we were building again. Clara is nearly 2 now. She is loud, fearless, and stubborn in ways that exhaust me and secretly make me proud. She has my grandmother's laugh. I know how impossible that sounds. Clara never met the woman she was named after, but sometimes she throws her head back and laughs from somewhere deep in her chest, and the sound stops me wherever I am. It belongs in the yellow house in Racine. It belongs beside the wind chimes in the vegetable garden. For 1 second, my grandmother is in the room again. Clara knows Marcus. She runs toward him when he arrives and calls him Papa Mark, although no one taught her to. He drives from Madison every few weeks, usually carrying too many books or a wooden toy he repaired himself. He never enters without knocking. He never assumes he is invited. And he never takes a single visit for granted. Clara does not know Lorraine. She never will. I can write that sentence now without guilt. For Clara's first birthday, we held a small party in our backyard. Olivia came early to help decorate. Maya brought a cake and pretended not to notice when Clara pushed both hands into it before we finished singing. Evelyn arrived carrying a bright red coat for her, even though it was July. She'll grow into it, she said. Children do that when you aren't looking. Marcus stood near the grill with Caleb. They still had moments of awkwardness, but the silences between them no longer felt empty. They felt like pauses in a conversation that had finally been allowed to continue. Evelyn sat with Clara on her lap for most of the afternoon. At one point, Clara grabbed her glasses and tried to throw them into the grass. Evelyn caught her wrist and smiled.
"You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" From Evelyn, it was the highest compliment imaginable. I made my grandmother's chicken and dumplings using the recipe she had written on an old index card. Her handwriting had begun to fade, so I kept the card inside a plastic sleeve. While the pot simmered, I looked through the kitchen window at the people in the yard. My sister, the cousin who finally spoke, the elderly woman who had decided shame was heavier than truth, the father who had driven 90 minutes for another chance, and Caleb, holding Clara while Marcus made her laugh. That was our family, not the group of guests who had stood at the top of Lorraine's staircase. This family had been built from people who chose to look again after realizing the first story was false. There was still an absence at the party. A grandmother should have been there. There should have been someone taking too many photographs, complaining about the frosting, and telling everyone that Clara looked exactly like Caleb. I did not pretend nothing had been lost. But the yard was full, the food was good, Clara had icing in her hair, and no one there required me to prove that I was sane before allowing me to hold my own daughter. We had not spoken to Lorraine since the hearing. Several months after losing the case, she sent one final letter. It came in a cream envelope with my name written in slanted blue ink. It was not an apology. The first sentence said that I had stolen her son, destroyed her family, and manipulated the court. I stopped reading. For years, Lorraine had survived by making other people finish the stories she started. This time, I refused. I placed the unread letter in the evidence folder, closed the drawer, and returned to my daughter.
I still think about the silence more often than the fall. The fall lasted only seconds. One moment I was standing on the landing. The next, I was at the bottom of the stairs, unable to breathe. But the silence belonged to everyone. Nearly 50 guests had looked down at me while Lorraine screamed that I had slipped. Some of them had heard our argument. Some had seen her blocking my path. At least a few must have noticed her arm extended above me, yet no one challenged her. For a long time, I believed their silence meant they were cruel. Now I think it was something more ordinary. Believing me would have required them to accept that Lorraine Mercer, the charming widow in pale clothes who remembered their birthdays and mailed handwritten thank you cards, had deliberately pushed her pregnant daughter-in-law down a staircase. That truth was ugly and complicated. Lorraine's explanation was simple. I had lost my balance. She had tried to help. She was devastated. People usually choose the story that demands the least from them. Lorraine understood that better than anyone. She knew that if she cried loudly enough, no one would listen to the woman struggling to breathe on the floor. That was why Olivia's advice mattered so much. Do not wait for people to believe you. Build the record. People become tired. They become frightened. They doubt their own memories. Documents do not. The recording did not care how convincing Lorraine looked on the witness stand. Dr. Patel's notes did not forget the anonymous calls. The letter in blue ink did not change its meaning because Lorraine began crying. The evidence waited quietly until someone was finally willing to look at it. People sometimes ask whether I hate her. For a long time, I said no because hatred seemed like another way of allowing Lorraine to remain important. But that was not entirely honest. I hated her when I woke from nightmares feeling myself fall again. I hated her when Caleb opened another birthday card from Marcus and discovered another year that had been stolen. I hated her when I looked at Clara and imagined a courtroom deciding whether I was safe enough to hold her. Eventually, the hatred became something colder and clearer. Understanding. Lorraine was not a monster who suddenly lost control because she disliked a baby's name. She was a person who needed complete control over everyone she loved. Long ago, she had learned that the easiest way to control someone was not to defeat them directly. It was to convince everyone around them that they were unstable, selfish, or dangerous. Then, the victim would spend all their energy defending themselves while Lorraine stood nearby pretending to be concerned. She had used that method against Marcus, against Maya, against me. It had worked for so many years that she could no longer imagine failure. That was why she pushed me in front of a house full of guests. She believed witnesses would protect her, not me. She trusted her reputation more than she feared the truth. And for several weeks, she was right. The family believed her. Caleb questioned me. Relatives sent messages about my mental health. Doctors received anonymous calls. A legal petition was filed before my daughter was born. Lorraine nearly succeeded because she had begun writing her version of events before I realized there was a story being written. She failed only because this time, enough people stopped being silent. Maya remembered her face. Evelyn refused to lie. Dr. Patel documented the calls. The hospital social worker recognized retaliation. Marcus opened 30 years of history. Olivia told me to preserve everything before I understood why. No single person defeated Lorraine. The truth survived because several people carried one piece of it each. And when those pieces were finally placed together, her version could no longer hold its shape. I named my daughter Clara. I want to say that plainly because beneath everything else, that was the beginning. All Lorraine had to do was accept that my daughter's name belonged to Caleb and me. Instead, she demanded everything. The name, the decisions, the child, her son's loyalty, my silence. She reached for complete control and lost every part of the family she had tried to possess. Freedom did not arrive the day the judge dismissed Lorraine's petition. For months, I still checked the street before leaving the house. We changed the locks, installed a camera beside the front door, and asked the building manager to contact us if Lorraine entered the property. Every unexpected envelope made my stomach tighten. Every unknown number felt like another anonymous report. Lorraine had trained me to expect danger inside ordinary things. A ringing phone, a family invitation, a polite message asking whether I was doing well. Caleb began therapy shortly after the hearing. At first, he said he was going because he needed help processing what happened with Marcus. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. He also needed to understand why he had doubted me. One evening, several months into therapy, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I need to apologize without explaining it away," he said. I waited. "You told me she pushed you, and I asked whether you were sure." His eyes remained on the table. "You were bruised, pregnant, and terrified, and I protected the person who hurt you because believing you would have destroyed the story I had about my mother." I felt my throat tighten. "I should have stood beside you immediately." "Yes," I said. He looked up, surprised by the directness. For a long time, I had tried to make his guilt easier to carry. That night, I stopped.
You should have believed me. I know. And I may forgive you completely one day, but I cannot pretend it did not change something. I know that too. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. There were no promises that everything would return to normal. Normal had been built on Lorraine's lies. We needed something new. Caleb learned to pause whenever he felt the urge to defend his mother automatically. I learned to tell him when fear returned, instead of becoming silent. Trust came back slowly, through small decisions. He showed me every message from relatives. I told him when I had nightmares. He stopped asking whether Lorraine might have meant something differently. Meaning well had protected her for long enough. Marcus never pressured Caleb to discuss the past, but sometimes the past arrived on its own. One Sunday, Marcus noticed a small scar near Caleb's eyebrow and asked how he got it. Caleb said he had fallen from a tree when he was 10. Marcus became quiet. I was there that day, he said.
Caleb stared at him. You weren't. I watched from my car across the street. Your mother had told me not to approach the house, but it was your birthday. Marcus remembered the green shirt Caleb wore. He remembered Lorraine carrying him inside after the fall. He remembered sitting in his car for nearly an hour, waiting to see whether an ambulance arrived. Caleb had no memory of seeing him. Lorraine had told him his father had forgotten his birthday. Moments like that kept happening. A school performance Marcus had watched from the back row. A Christmas gift Lorraine claimed came from an uncle. A photograph taken at a park where Marcus had been cropped from the edge. Caleb's childhood was not restored all at once. It returned in fragments, each one proving that his father had been closer than he was allowed to know. Marcus apologized often for giving up the legal fight. Caleb eventually asked him to stop. You were fighting someone who controlled every door, he said. I wish you had kept trying, but I understand why you became tired. Marcus looked down at his hands. I don't want understanding to become an excuse. It isn't, Caleb replied. It's just the truth. That conversation changed them. They stopped trying to recreate a father and son relationship from 30 years earlier. They began building one that belonged to the present. Marcus taught Caleb how to restore an old wooden chair he had found at an estate sale. Caleb helped Marcus replace the aging computer in his workshop. They argued about baseball. They discovered they both hated olives and folded towels the same strange way. Ordinary similarities affected Caleb more deeply than the dramatic revelations. They were proof that something had survived Lorraine's efforts to erase it. Sometimes I watched them together and felt angry about everything they had lost. But I also felt grateful that Lorraine had failed to take the years still ahead of them. She had controlled the past. She would not control what came next.
A year after the hearing, Lorraine tried to reach us through someone else. It was not a letter this time. It was Caleb's childhood friend Aaron, a man I had met only twice. He called Caleb one evening and said Lorraine had contacted him because she was, quote, worried about the family. She says she only wants one conversation, Aaron explained. She thinks if you sat down with a mediator, you could work through everything. Caleb put the phone on speaker. What exactly did she tell you happened? He asked. Aaron hesitated. She said Hannah misunderstood the fall. She said the court case was a desperate mistake made by a frightened grandmother. Did she tell you she called Hannah's doctor? No. Did she mention the recording? What recording? Did she tell you she kept my father's letters from me for almost 30 years? The silence on the line lasted several seconds. No, Aaron said. Caleb looked at me. That was still Lorraine's method. Remove the facts that made her actions impossible to excuse. Leave only the wounded mother asking for one reasonable conversation. She told me you were being controlled, Aaron added carefully. Caleb almost laughed. Of course she did. He thanked Aaron for calling and asked him not to pass along any more messages. Then he blocked the number Lorraine had used to reach him. What surprised me was how little the call affected him. A year earlier, even the suggestion that Lorraine was suffering would have pulled him apart. Now he recognized the shape of the story before it could close around him. She still thinks she can install a version of us in someone else's head, he said. She probably always will. Does that frighten you? I consider the question. Less than it used to. The evidence folder remained in a locked drawer, and copies were stored with our attorney. We had cameras, medical records, witness statements. Most importantly, we no longer had silence between us. Lorraine could still tell stories, but she could not make us live inside them. That winter, Marcus invited us to Madison for Christmas. It was the first holiday he and Caleb had spent together since Caleb was a child. Marcus decorated too much. Lights covered the porch, the windows, and a small tree beside the driveway. Inside, he had placed a wooden train around the Christmas tree for Clara. Caleb stopped when he saw it. I had one like this, he said. Marcus looked embarrassed.
It was supposed to be yours. I bought it when you were 6. Caleb knelt and touched one of the painted carriages. Mom told me it belonged to my grandfather. Marcus nodded. She returned it after the divorce. I kept it. For a moment, I feared the train would become another stolen memory, another object too heavy with the past to enjoy. Then, Clara ran into the room, pushed the engine across the floor, and shouted when the carriages came apart. Caleb laughed. He sat beside her and showed her how to connect them again. Marcus watched from the doorway. The train could not repair Caleb's childhood, but it could become part of Clara's. That was how healing usually happened for us. Not by returning what Lorraine had taken, by refusing to let the damage decide what happened next. Later that evening, after Clara fell asleep, Marcus handed Caleb a photograph. It showed Marcus holding him as a baby outside a small apartment building. Lorraine stood beside them. Her face had not been scratched out. I found this behind an old cabinet, Marcus said. I thought you might want it. Caleb studied the image for a long time. His parents looked young and happy. For years, he had wanted the past to become simple, to discover that one parent was entirely good and the other entirely false. But the photograph would not allow that. There had been happiness. There had been love. Then something inside Lorraine had twisted that love into ownership. Caleb placed the photograph on the table. I don't know what to feel when I look at her. You don't have to choose one thing, Marcus said. Caleb looked at him. You can miss who she was to you and still protect your family from who she is. That sentence stayed with us. No contact was not revenge. It was not punishment. It was protection. Lorraine had spent years teaching Caleb that boundaries were cruelty whenever they limited her access to him.
He was finally learning that a closed door can be an act of love when the person outside keeps bringing harm through it.
By Clara's second birthday, our life no longer felt organized around Lorraine. That was the change I noticed most. For months after the staircase, every decision had been connected to her somehow. Where we went, who knew our address, which relatives we trusted, whether an unknown car parked outside belonged to someone she had sent. Even happy moments carried the question of how Lorraine might use them. Eventually, ordinary life began taking up space again. Clara learned to climb onto the couch by herself. She developed a fierce hatred of peas and an equally fierce love of strawberries. She called every animal a dog, including birds, squirrels, and once a picture of an elephant. Caleb and Marcus spent Saturday mornings restoring furniture in Marcus's workshop. I returned to work part-time and discovered that I could leave Clara with Caleb without checking my phone every 10 minutes. The fear did not disappear all at once. It simply stopped being the largest thing in every room. We held Clara's second birthday in a small park near our house. Olivia brought balloons. Maya arrived with her 2 children and a cake decorated with crooked pink flowers. Evelyn sat beneath a tree wearing a white hat and complaining about the heat while refusing every offer to move into the shade. Marcus gave Clara a wooden rocking horse he had restored. The original paint had been chipped and gray. He sanded it smooth and painted tiny white stars along its sides. Clara climbed onto it before we could finish removing the ribbon. Caleb steadied her while Marcus stood nearby looking terrified that she might fall. "She's fine," Caleb said. "I know. You're holding the horse with both hands. I'm being careful." Caleb smiled. There was no bitterness in the exchange, only the ordinary nervousness of a grandfather and the teasing of a son who had finally been given enough time to know him. Later, while everyone ate cake, Maya sat beside me. "Do you ever wonder what Lorraine is doing?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Do you think she believes what she says?" I watched Clara trying to feed frosting to a pigeon. "Yes," I said after a moment. "At least by the time she finishes saying it." That was the strangest part of Lorraine. I did not think she experienced herself as a liar. She began with the outcome she needed, then rearranged reality until that outcome appeared justified. If she needed Marcus gone, he became dangerous. If she needed Maya punished, Maya became a thief. If she needed control of Clara, I became unstable. The facts were never the starting point. They were material she cut and shaped afterward. Maya looked toward Caleb.
"I still feel guilty that I didn't warn you more clearly." "You tried. I said one vague sentence while washing dishes. You were afraid of what would happen if Lorraine learned you had spoken." Maya nodded. "She always made silence feel safer. For a while, it was. That was the truth people rarely understand. Speaking does not always make you safer immediately. Sometimes speaking makes everything worse. It can cost relationships, money, comfort, and the illusion that your family is whole. The reason to speak is not that truth guarantees protection. It is that silence guarantees the person causing harm gets to keep writing the story alone." Near sunset, Evelyn asked Caleb to help her stand. Before leaving, she pressed a small envelope into my hand. "Not another secret," she said. "I'm finished with those." Inside was a photograph of Lorraine as a young woman sitting beside Marcus on the front steps of their first apartment. Baby Caleb slept in her arms. On the back, in Evelyn's handwriting, were the words, "Before fear became control." I studied Lorraine's face. She looked tired and genuinely happy. For a second, I saw the woman Caleb still mourned. Not innocent, not misunderstood, but human. That did not excuse anything. It made the warning clearer. People do not need to begin as monsters, to become dangerous. Sometimes they begin afraid of losing love. Then they tighten their grip. And when the person they love tries to breathe, they call that movement betrayal.
A few weeks after Clara's second birthday, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. For 1 second, the old fear returned. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. A woman introduced herself as Lorraine's neighbor. Her name was Susan. "I'm sorry to contact you," she said. "Lorraine gave me your number a long time ago for emergencies." My grip tightened around the phone. "Is she hurt?" "No, nothing like that." Susan hesitated. "She has been telling people that Caleb keeps her from seeing Clara because you are afraid the child will prefer her." I closed my eyes. Of all the possible stories, that one was almost laughable. Almost. "She also says Marcus has manipulated Caleb for money," Susan continued, "and that the court dismissed her case because your family knew the judge personally." None of it was true, but the story had evolved. Lorraine was still rebuilding herself as the victim, one new audience at a time. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because yesterday she asked me to write a letter saying I had seen Caleb shouting at her outside the house." "Did you?" "No." Susan's answer came quickly. "I've never even met Caleb." There it was again. Another witness being prepared for an event that had never happened. Susan lowered her voice. "She said the details didn't matter because I knew what kind of mother she was." "What did you tell her?" "That I would not sign anything." I thanked her and asked whether she would be willing to send me a brief written account of the conversation. She agreed. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the evidence folder. Lorraine was still trying. Not because she had a realistic legal path back into our lives, because stopping would require her to accept that she had caused the loss herself. That was the one truth she could not survive. When Caleb came home, I told him about Susan. He listened calmly. A year earlier, the news would have shattered him. Now he opened his laptop, forwarded Susan's statement to our attorney, and added the date to the record. Then he closed the computer. "That's it?" I asked. "What else is there?" "I don't know. I expected you to be more upset." "I am upset." He sat across from me, but I don't have to enter the story every time she starts telling it. That was perhaps the clearest sign of how far he had come. Lorraine's accusations used to pull him toward her immediately. He would explain, apologize, defend, and question himself. Now he understood that responding was often the doorway she wanted. So we did nothing beyond preserving the evidence. No angry call, no warning, no attempt to correct every neighbor she had spoken to. We let the lie remain outside our house. Several months later, we learned through Denise that Lorraine had sold the large Brookfield home. the staircase house. She moved into a smaller condo closer to the city. When Denise told us, I felt something unexpected. Relief. That house had existed in my mind like a physical threat. The dark wooden steps, the landing, the railing crowded with faces. Knowing someone else lived there did not erase what happened, but it broke Lorraine's ownership of the place. The staircase became wood again. Not a monument, not a mouth waiting to swallow me, just part of a house that would eventually belong to people who knew nothing about us. Around that time, Caleb asked whether I wanted to visit the property one final time. Lorraine had already moved out. The new owners had not yet taken possession. I thought it might help, he said. I considered it for several days. Then I said no. For years, I had imagined returning to the top of those stairs. I pictured standing in the exact place where Lorraine blocked me and proving that I was no longer afraid. But healing did not require me to reenact the worst moment of my life. I did not need to conquer the staircase. I only needed to stop carrying it everywhere. So I never went back. Instead, that weekend we drove to Racine. I took Caleb and Clara to my grandmother's yellow house. Another family lived there now, but the woman who answered the door recognized my name from a letter I had sent ahead. She allowed us into the backyard. The vegetable garden was smaller. The garage had been painted white. But the wind chimes still hung near the porch. Clara ran through the grass while Caleb stood beside me. This is where she raised you? He asked. Yes. Clara laughed near the old garden, my grandmother's laugh. The wind chimes moved above us. For once, the past did not feel like something stolen. It felt like something that had found its way forward.
For a long time, I measured recovery by what no longer frightened me. The first time I answered an unknown number without feeling sick. The first family gathering where I did not study every face for hidden suspicion. The first night Clara slept at Marcus's house, and I did not imagine Lorraine standing outside his door. Then I began measuring it differently, by what had returned. Music in the kitchen, unplanned weekends, arguments with Caleb that remained about dishes, bills, or whose turn it was to buy diapers, instead of collapsing into questions about loyalty. Trust did not return as one grand feeling. It returned as ordinary life. Caleb and I eventually sold the townhouse, not because Lorraine had helped us buy it, or because the memories inside it were unbearable. We simply needed more space, and the second loan made remaining there impractical. The day we moved, Caleb stood alone in Clara's empty nursery. I found him looking at the pale blue wall where her crib had been. This is where I first understood who she was, he said. It was also where he had first listened to the recording without defending Lorraine, where he learned Marcus was alive, where he had begun losing one family and building another. Do you regret buying this place? I asked. Caleb shook his head. No. Clara came home here. He touched the wall once, then followed me outside. Our new house was smaller than Lorraine's old home and less impressive than the townhouse. It had uneven floors, a narrow kitchen, and a backyard large enough for Clara to run in circles. Marcus helped repair the porch. Olivia painted the guest room. Maya brought food on moving day and accidentally unpacked 3 boxes into the wrong rooms. Evelyn sat in a folding chair, giving orders no one had requested. No one gave us money. No one claimed a permanent right to the house because they had helped. People arrived, worked, ate pizza on the floor, and left without attaching a debt to that kindness. The first night, after everyone went home, Caleb and I stood in the kitchen, listening to Clara talk to herself through the baby monitor. This one is ours, he said. The sentence sounded simple, but I understood everything beneath it. No gift disguised as ownership. No mother waiting to remind us what we owed. No invisible chair reserved for Lorraine inside every decision. Ours. A few months later, Marcus brought over the final letter from his box. It was not addressed to Caleb. It was addressed to Lorraine. He had written it shortly after their divorce, but never mailed it. He asked whether Caleb wanted to read it. Caleb hesitated, then opened the envelope. Marcus had written only 1 page. He asked Lorraine to stop using their son as punishment. He promised he would accept any reasonable boundary if she allowed Caleb to know he was loved by both parents. He ended with 1 sentence. One day, he will be old enough to ask what happened, and I hope you have not made the truth impossible for him to survive. Caleb read the line several times. She knew, he said. Marcus nodded. She always knew you might discover it. And she kept going. Yes. That was difficult for Caleb in a way even the stolen cards had not been. For years, part of him had believed Lorraine did not understand the damage she caused, that fear and desperation had blinded her. Marcus's letter showed that someone had explained it plainly. She had been warned. She chose control anyway. Caleb folded the page and placed it back in the envelope. I don't want any more letters, he said. Marcus looked concerned. I mean, from the past. I know enough. That became another kind of boundary. The truth had saved us, but Caleb did not need to spend the rest of his life excavating every lie. There would always be another memory to question, another story Lorraine might have altered, another object that had belonged to Marcus first. At some point, understanding the pattern mattered more than solving every detail. Lorraine had taken much of Caleb's past. He refused to give her his future by spending every day searching through the ruins. That evening, he carried Clara into the backyard. She pointed toward the first star appearing above the houses. Moon, she said confidently. It's a star, Caleb told her. Moon, he laughed. All right, moon. Marcus stood beside them while I watched from the porch. 3 generations under the same sky. Lorraine had once convinced all of them that only she could hold the family together, but there they were without her. Not broken, not weak, simply free. I sometimes think about the moment Lorraine pushed me. Not the fall itself, the second before it, her hand against my chest, the calm in her eyes, the absolute certainty that whatever happened next, she would control the explanation. She believed reputation was stronger than evidence. For most of her life it had been. She had convinced a child that his father abandoned him. She had convinced relatives that an innocent teenager was a thief. She had convinced nearly 50 guests that a pregnant woman had simply lost her balance. Lorraine understood something uncomfortable about people. Most do not examine the first story they hear unless something forces them to. The first story gives them roles: a victim, a villain, a concerned mother, an unstable wife. Once those roles are assigned, every new fact is judged according to them. My fear became proof I was irrational. My silence became proof I was hiding something. My attempt to defend myself became proof I was obsessed with Lorraine. There was no correct reaction because she had designed a version of me in which every reaction confirmed her claim. The only way out was to stop arguing inside the world she had created. That was what the record allowed me to do. I did not need to persuade everyone with emotion. I had her voice, her handwriting, the doctor's notes, the hospital report, the witnesses she tried to recruit, and the history she had repeated almost exactly. The truth did not win because it was automatically stronger. It won because people finally carried it into the same room. I named my daughter Clara. That was the decision Lorraine could not tolerate. Not because Elaine was a better name, not because there was a real family tradition, because Clara represented something Lorraine did not control. My past, my love, my right to give my child a connection that had nothing to do with her. She demanded the name as proof that everyone in the family still revolved around her. When I refused, she decided I had to be removed. In the end, she received nothing. Her name does not belong to my daughter. She has never held Clara.
Caleb no longer answers her calls. Marcus has his son back. Not in the way either of them deserved, but in the time they still have. We returned every dollar Lorraine once used to claim a place in our decisions. She reached for complete control and closed her hand around emptiness. I do not consider that revenge. Revenge would require me to organize my life around her suffering. I have no interest in doing that. The consequence Lorraine lives with is simply the absence created by her own choices. There is no dramatic ending to our story, no final confrontation, no apology arriving in blue ink, no moment when Lorraine admits what she did and asks for forgiveness. People like her rarely offer closure, because closure requires accepting a version of events they do not control. So we created our own. We stopped opening the letters. We stopped answering messages delivered through friends. We stopped explaining our boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. We built a home where gifts do not become debts, where concern is not used as surveillance, where love does not require surrender. Clara is safe. She climbs everything now, including furniture she has been told repeatedly not to climb. Every time she approaches the stairs, I feel the old fear tighten inside me. Then Caleb takes her hand. Slowly, he tells her. One step, then another. He does not frighten her away from climbing. He teaches her how to do it safely. Sometimes Marcus waits at the bottom with his arms open, and I watch my daughter descend toward people who love her without demanding anything in return. That image has slowly replaced the other staircase in my mind. Not Lorraine standing above me, Clara coming down carefully, Caleb beside her, Marcus waiting below. No one pushing, no one performing. No silence filled with fear. Only a child learning where to place her feet. My grandmother taught me to leave a room before saying something I could never take back. Lorraine taught me a different lesson. Sometimes leaving is not enough. Sometimes you must close the door, preserve the truth, and refuse to let anyone follow you into the life you are trying to protect. My daughter is named Clara. She is loved, she is free to become whoever she chooses, and no one will ever stand at the top of a staircase deciding otherwise.